The first time I ever noticed Koji Yakusho was in Shall We Dance? And I saw the film 3 times in a row because I really wanted to know how he achieved this lightness of being. And I thought he was just a fantastic actor. And then I saw him again in Babel, and I recognized this was the same guy. But of course, this is the actor, this is not the part. The part, the man called Hirayama, slowly revealed himself after I saw the locations, all the beautiful Tokyo toilet places, the architectural marvels. And when, together with Takuma-san, we came up with the idea to tell the story of a man who was responsible for keeping them clean and dedicated to these places, then Hirayama slowly shaped up. And I remember that I saw him first when Takuma-san said he's a bit like a monk, and described his monk-like eyes when he woke up. And I could relate to the idea that Hirayama was a monk. I know a few monks, and they were all extremely gentle people. They all also had a sense of humor, at least the monks I met. And my favorite monk then became a little bit my image of Hirayama. And my favorite monk was a monk for 10 years or so, and you all know him as a singer. That is Leonard Cohen. He lived in Mount Baldy in the north of California. It's a Zen monastery, and he applied there. And he told me how he first, for the first year, or even longer, he was just an apprentice, and how he had to do all the necessary work. He had to also clean toilets. And I had Leonard Cohen in front of me when I first imagined a monk who would clean toilets. And then slowly, of course, the idea of the monk disappeared, and what was left over was just a gentle person who liked to be at service. But I admit, I kept the face of Leonard Cohen in my mind when I prepared for the film. And then, of course, I had the face of Koji Yakusho. I didn't need any other face in front of me. But when I imagined when we were writing the script, I did think of Leonard Cohen secretly. I never told anybody until now. So, thank you, Leonard. You were very helpful, because I loved your story when you first came to the monastery and when you found yourself cleaning toilets. I loved that. Anyway, it fitted our story, and I slowly then, in my mind at least, had to flesh out the person of Hirayama. He was certainly not a man cleaning toilets from the beginning. He had a different life. He had a privileged life. At least that's how I imagined him. And I was completely in accord with Takuma-san in this regard. He had a life of a businessman, a successful businessman. We agreed on that. And then I still tried to remember, or to find out in my mind, how such a businessman makes just such a huge change. And how Hirayama, if he was rich and was driving a big car and had lots of employees, how he became this self-sufficient man in a modest apartment with nothing except his music and some trees, some little trees. And I figured something happened to him. At one point, something must have happened to him that made him decide for a different way of living. And I knew that that was important for the actor. Actors don't just want to know how to do this and that, but they really want to know who they are in order to do this or that. So I knew that Koji would eventually ask me, why is this man doing this and why is he living this life and where did he come from, and if he has this rich sister who shows up in a Lexus, what is his past then? So I told Koji Akusho, I wrote it down for him, the idea that in my mind was the turning point in the life of Hirayama. I figured, yes, he had been rich, he had been influential, he had been a businessman, but he had also been drinking a lot, like other people do. And he had not really enjoyed his life as a businessman, and he had not really enjoyed his drinking, but he kept drinking more, and maybe also every now and then took some other drugs, but maybe he only drank. And his life was going downhill because he was not fulfilled. So he would sometimes wake up in a hotel room and didn't even know how he ended up there. And he was a bit disgusted with himself and with this life. And as these things go, his life slowly went downhill, even if he was still a respected businessman and rich and everything. But he was filled with more and more disgust for it. So much that sometimes he even thought of ending this life, but he didn't know how. Suicide was not really an option. So the only option was to lead a radically different life, but how? So I imagined that one morning he woke up from a nightmare, and he was in this cheap, ugly hotel room, and he had no idea how he got there. And he had a headache and was staring in front of himself. And then out of a sudden, a ray of sunlight came, just hitting him. And it came through some leaves, and he looked at the one next to him, and there he saw the leaves moving in the wind. And he looked back at the window and the ray coming through the clouds there. And he had a sudden, very existential realization. He realized nobody else saw this except for him. This ray of light was for no other human being than for him. Nobody saw it. Nobody saw the kohlrabi on the wall except for him. And he realized that light had traveled for millions of miles from the sun to reach him, only him. And that light had needed several seconds to get there, to get only to him and create only for him this beautiful little miracle, this amazing play of light. And he realized he was unique. And he was not the businessman who disappeared among millions of others. He was a unique person. And that light showed him that. And out of a sudden he realized that could open the path to a different light. That ray of light and the leaves on the wall. Because it made him incredibly happy and satisfied. And he realized he didn't know the big car outside, and he didn't need the office. He didn't need that life. He could live simply and just happy with light and trees, because the trees and their leaves created that spectacle only for him. And he liked it so much that he tried that life where the only thing he needed was every now and then to see this ray of light and the wind in the trees. And whenever he saw it, he was happy. And then he gave up his job because he realized the job didn't make him happy and all the money he earned didn't make him happy. And he moved into a simple place and found a simple job. A job that guaranteed that every now and then he'd see these komarabis. He became the guardian of these toilets, and they're all built into little parks, and they all have trees around them. And he could do something that was extremely useful, and he could work alone. And every now and then he would feel his uniqueness, and he would feel that he could be of service, and that he was about to start a useful life. And he became Hirayama. And he remembered that as a boy he had taken pictures. So that was one thing he picked up again, because it gave him the chance to somehow capture these komarabis and the trees that he started to like more and more. And it was like a gesture of reverence towards the trees and the light. Photography for him became an act of saying thank you to the light. And the simpler his life got, the happier he was, until he was in that little apartment in Osage and had a steady job and went there every morning and every now and then took a picture and respected the light and the trees. And of course every person he met, because if he himself accepted himself as unique, everybody else was too. So he became a monk without knowing it. I don't think in his own thinking he was living the life of a monk. He was just living the life he started to like. And the light had saved him in order to lead this life. So he lived this life in honor of the light and the trees, and became a person who was happier than he'd ever imagined. But he didn't think of him as a monk, of course. I thought of him as a monk, and Takuma and I thought of him as a monk. But we know now why. It was the light that helped him to become that person, that unique person. And I sometimes thank Leonard Cohen in my mind that he lended this monk a face when I didn't know him yet. So, here's my Hirayama story. And then, of course, Koji Yakusho so much became that person that I didn't need any other imagination and that I didn't need my story anymore. There was him, and he was Hirayama, and Hirayama was he, and he showed me with his eyes how thankful he was for his job and for the light. And my favorite thing that we shot was when he got out of the door in the morning and looked at the sky and had a little smile. That was my favorite thing, and that's why we kept it at the beginning of every day as a little ritual, looking up. Maybe he also saw the sky tree, but maybe he just looked at the clouds and had his little smile, saying, okay, I'm ready for the light. So, Hirayama. Hirayama is really in every person. Hirayama is in everybody if we only accepted the Hirayama in ourselves. I once made a movie where I had a similar constellation of having to explain to my actors who they were And just as much as I did not tell the actor that I thought of him as a monk, I told him the story of the light, but I didn't tell him monk. I had a little bit the same situation with the two actors who played the angels in Wings of Desire. I mean, then they knew, obviously, that they had to play angels, but they wanted to know, what do we do? How do we play angels? Just in the same way that Koji Yakusho wanted to know, how do I play Hirayama? What is it about him? And it was basically the same answer. It's the way you look at the world. It's the way these angels look at people and love them. Hirayama also had this loving look at things. It started with the tree and the light, but then it passed on to every other thing. And it's the way that, and Koji really understood that. Koji Yakusho really started to have this look full of love and respect, not only at his trees, but at every person. He really sees everybody. He actually is the only one who sees the homeless. All the other people go by and he sees him and he gives him respect. Anyway, Koji Yakusho so much became Hirayama that I almost forgot where the name came from. I didn't invent the name. Maybe I could have, but I didn't dare to. Takuma-san reminded me of Ryo Shusho's name in Tokyo Story. He was Hirayama. So, it seemed very obvious that our man was called Hirayama. I like the sound of it. But I also liked the idea that there had been a previous carrier of the name. Anyway.